Hey, all cheaters. Welcome to the Always Cheating Podcast. My name is Josh. I'm here with Brandon. Brandon, how are you?
I'm good, Josh. Audio fidelity is our number one chief concern, and I'm glad that our IBM Deep Blue computer, just the cooling fan just turned off to help our fidelity. What that means is, yes, this is another preseason FPL preview in which we have utilized the Always Cheating IBM supercomputer, courtesy of Deep Blue, the champion chess-playing computer.
That's right.
Which we used to great effect in our last episode, did we not, Josh?
Great effect, great response to that pod, which was nice. It felt like we found, every year you take a handful of weeks off, takes a little while to find your footing again. A lot of new players join the league, et cetera, et cetera. And so that felt like, okay, now we're in proper Always Cheating order. That was a nice reset pod for us. So thank you to everyone who listened, gave us nice feedback. We recorded that pod just 3 nights ago, so you and I are feeling very fresh right now. Yeah. We have moved on now from forwards to midfielders. Any thoughts on, we got some feedback on the forward pod already. Any thoughts on players that that people think we missed, or players that you feel like we should have included in the pod, anything like that?
Well, the big one that we got comments on was Nico Williams, not the defender from Forest, Nico Jackson, or Nicholas Jackson, the new forward at Chelsea, Senegalese, 22 years old, who actually has just scored while we're recording this podcast against Newcastle down in Atlanta here in the States. So, and interestingly enough, Jackson started tonight alongside Nkuku. So people who are enthusiastic about Jackson coming to Chelsea are justified. And I'm wondering if we're going to have another Wilson Isak situation on our hands with Nkuku and Jackson. So stay tuned. Although I will say, in the first half, Jackson went down twice. Struggling with sort of injury. Maybe he's just not match fit or whatever. But is he going to be one of those guys?
And Isak and Wilson both made our top 10 for the Always Cheating forward rank, and so it could work out well. And I think doubles are an interesting theme, Brandon, to establish early on in this podcast, because as we go through this 10, there are a lot of sets of two midfielders. It's multiple squads that we're going to have to discuss on tonight's pod, and where to put those two players, two from Arsenal, two from Man United. Is there another? Oh yeah, two from Man City as well. Sure. So lots of different players to talk about in this week's pod.
I think we've got 3 from Arsenal. Spoiler alert! But as Bob Odenkirk would tell us, Josh, triples makes it safest. So.
That's right. Well, is it the second? I think we've slipped now 2. I think you should leave references.
2 guys talking. Now, you're not referencing. I think you should leave. So let's just.
This is so true.
Slip the references in and move on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a couple guys living in. Well, I always want to say Brooklyn now, but you are on the Upper West Side now. I can't quite get used to that still in my head. In my head, you're still a neighborhood away from me. Yeah. But one thing I did want to mention is that because we're doing these top 10 midfielders, or these top 10 rankings across the board, we're looking at players that we think are going to be the best overall for the season. Not necessarily the ones who are going to score the most points, but the best in terms of value, the best in terms of what it's going to take for you to. I mean, yes, obviously, it'd be great to just be like, all right, we're going to predict these 10 players have the most points, but it's not always about just points, right? It's about, you only have $100 million budget to work with, right? It's not, if you're doing draft, it's different, obviously. But if you're just working under a fixed budget, then you do have to make some really tough choices. And so value becomes an incredibly important part of the equation. And that's why someone like Mo Salah, despite being one of the absolute best players in the Premier League, is not universally owned going into game week 1, because Erling Haaland is 14 million, Mo Salah is 12.5. So not everyone, if you want to have Trent Alexander-Arnold, right? Spoiler alert for our defender pod in a couple of days, right? It's it's very hard. Suddenly you have 15 players, you got to fill every single spot. You can't leave any empty. And if 30 plus million is allocated for just 3 players, it does make things very tricky in terms of what you're going to, how you're going to fit everything else in.
And I think categories are really important. We're all as engaged fantasy managers used to looking at data tables, and data tables will take all of the stats into account and give you an aggregated 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's what we're going to present. We have made some very basic categories so that our Always Cheating brains can compute. as you said, Josh, what's the value?
I think you're selling. I think you're selling us a little bit short here because there are all these models. When you actually look at what goes into the models, it's not like. It's not that sophisticated. This is all stuff that like most of us could do on our own if we just sat down.
Fair. I guess what I mean to say is exactly that. Like it's not that complicated, and that's what we've learned in this exercise. But the additional thing that I've learned is if you step away from what's the aggregate, we're going to go 10-1 best midfielders, and such as the IBM computer told us.
Sure, it's not us.
But when you look at number 1 or number 3, yes, when you total up all these categories, they hit at number 3. But during the FPL season, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you don't need the third best midfielder. You specifically need a midfielder that is good value. Or you need a midfielder that has a high ceiling or one that is a differential. And so while one midfielder that we'll mention might be 4th in the list, that midfielder might be number 1 at a certain specific moment in the season for your FPL team when you have a specific need. So then I think it's really cool to take a step back from the aggregation and say, well, what's the individual category say for a situation that I might specifically be in later on down the line?
Yeah, it makes it very clean, right? At some point, it's like, all right, well, it's just like, all right, move down my list. It's like, it's like an NFL draft or whatever. It's like you just take the best player available, right? It's like, okay, this is what I have 7.5 million. Okay, here's how I've ranked all these players. What's the best player that I can fit in at 7.5 million or less? So with all that said, there aren't a lot of 4.5, like the kind of very bottom end of the midfielder rankings that. Those aren't really on here yet, and we get a lot of questions about those early in the season. I just think in general, it's really a little bit more of a first wild card problem. I think in general, unless you get hit pretty badly by injuries early on in the first couple weeks of the season, we don't necessarily really know who the best. First of all, for one thing, you should ideally have a team full of starters and not have like a whole bunch of punts going into the first couple weeks of the season. So in general, you shouldn't need to go that deep onto your bench, right? In terms of like, I'm really going to need my 4.5 million midfielder to get me huge minutes. And second, typically there are a couple players that emerge from the promoted squads or from some of the kind of bottom half of the table squads, let's call them. And I think those players tend to emerge after a couple weeks into the season. And so I think in general, it's the first wild card is when I'm really focused on the kind of bench value and trying to find the best options for that spot in my squad.
That's right. Imagine yourself going to a new school at the start of each fantasy season, and you have to meet new people and make new friends to sort of join your crew. And those are, the Luton midfielders. We're going to, we have to meet them. We have to hang out with them. We have to copy their homework and see what it's all about.
Yeah, exactly. You went to a new school with roughly 30 to 35 of your good friends, but then you need, exactly. But then you're inevitably going to take a couple of electives.
One of them is Mo Salah, coincidentally. So.
Yeah, exactly. That'd be cool going to school with Mo Salah.
Sounds fun.
I bet he was probably taking his shirt off all the time, right? Just like
B+ on his chemistry exam, and his shirt's popping off immediately.
Exactly. Oh, yeah, I bet he had like a 24-pack even then, whatever.
No doubt.
Is there, can you get more than a 6-pack? I don't even really understand how a 6-pack works.
It's unlimited,
right?
It's unlimited, Josh. With technology
it's
today,
unlimited with him. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, anyway, so we did just as a quick refresher with the categories we looked at. Spit it all into our proprietary model, Brandon. Were historical performance, ceiling, floor, value, squad quality, fun to own, risk factors. We even looked, Brandon. I can't believe we did this at things like expected goals and expected assists and all that fun data that everybody has come to know and tolerate.
Well,
and so it's all in love in some cases.
That's it. There's a particular player on the list where XG sort of comes in to play in an interesting way, and the X factors apply heavily to the high ceiling, high floor identifiers. The secret sauce here, though, Josh, is we always tell managers to make fantasy fun. Don't make it miserable. So I think like that's the Salt Bay off the elbow on our algorithm. Yeah. It's the fun factor for a lot of these guys.
That's true, and you know, I would say this was, and we'll stop talking about our model. I can see now why when people start creating a model, they just want to talk about the model more than the actual results, because it is fun. But we did. You and I had debated a few. I'd say more than with the. I mean, ultimately with the forwards, you're only talking about. The entire pool of forwards is like 30 to 40 players, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, some teams only have one or two forwards even listed, you know, in the fantasy game. But with midfielders, you're talking about what is it, like more than 200, right? It's a significantly larger pool of players, and so much trickier to figure out exactly how to spit all this together. And so, yeah, I think we were both surprised by a couple players. There was one player that you thought I had way, way too high, and we went back and forth on that. Yep. And then one player that you and I both had higher than we expected. Yes. And we'll, you know, so that's just a little bit of a tease. We'll get into that in a minute. I just wanted to quickly note, though, Brandon, Super League code. If you have not yet joined the Always Cheating Super League, you can go to our website. There's the auto join button right, literally at the top. There's a banner right at the top. You just click that button, you'll immediately join. But if you're sitting there and you've got the app open right now, you can just use code A63ECL. I'm sure that's very easy for everyone to remember, but if you have a pen handy, A63ECL is what you use. We also got a bunch of new Patreons this week, yes. Brandon, including a new producer patron. Welcome to Linus Wennerstrom, our newest producer patron, as well as Corey Harris, Donovan Carter, and a Volkswagen patron as well, Nick Sandylands, which is I hope that's his real last name. That's a great last name.
It sounds like a great place to vacation, Nick, at Sandylands, and I look forward to hanging out with you there. Josh, we need to talk about the piece of swag that we'll be delivering to our Volkswagen and producer patrons. I have a good idea, so let's talk about that offline. But
why don't you just tell our listeners?
Well, listen,
what's your idea? I want to hear it.
I did a trial run with some winners of the Always Cheating leagues last season. And I sent them pint glasses with the Always Cheating scarf guy on them. Yeah. And they're just starting to hit doorsteps of our league winners. And they're coming back with rave reviews. So, you know, if I'm sick of keeping track of people's T-shirt sizes, and listen, all due respect, I came out of COVID, a different person. People's T-shirt sizes change. This is lots of moving targets there, but people's appetite for drinking vessels never changes. So that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. I like it. Well, that's a cool. I think we should just go ahead and do that, Brent. I think that's a good idea. If somebody at the Volkswagen producer level really does want a T-shirt instead, of course,
we'll figure something out.
Be happy to accommodate. But yeah, exactly. So that's a little behind the scenes scoop there for everybody.
Yeah, we really workshopped that. But just to give the full blooded pitch for Patreon before we move on to our top 10 midfielders, I just really want to stress how much the support helps us produce this free podcast and then our Patreon only podcast throughout the season. So if you become a Patreon supporter at certain tiers, you get an extra ad-free podcast every week, really on the eve of the game week deadline, where we can work out our thoughts about the deadline and hopefully enjoy a few more guests and interesting new perspectives this season. And our Discord has really flourished over the last year. So that's a place for people to speak directly to you and me, Josh, about specific team advice, or just enjoy a community of fun people. So like the pod, support the pod, get more FPL stuff in return. Go to patreon.com/alwayscheating.
Perfect. And then just one final note, Brandon, which is that all of our preseason content's been brought to you by Fantasy Football Hub. We know them. We love them. They have done some really great work in the preseason. I just like the way that they've kind of mixed up their offerings as well. So you go to fantasyfootballhub.co.uk/always, 50% off membership at any tier. Okay, I feel like I said that very quickly, Brandon, but fantasyfootballhub.co.uk/always for 50% off your membership at any pledge tier. Win your mini league or get your money back, get your team ready for free by AI, expert team reveals, which is really the key one because those go on all season long. So each week, and again, we've stressed this the last couple pods, but it's that's just fun. Like that part of the fun of all this stuff is just the thought process and the thinking through and thinking about the strategy. And so to me, there's an idea with a lot of this stuff, whether you're looking at sort of model generated content like ours, of course, Brandon, everybody loves that.
Thank you, IBM.
Or expert team, whether you're copying somebody else's idea. I mean, that to me, that's not really how it works in my experience in either way, really. Yeah. I just enjoy thinking the stuff through, right? And so I enjoy looking at models because it's fun for me to think about how that kind of clashes with my own thinking. It doesn't replace my own thinking. It's just part of it. And then the team reveals, I just enjoy hearing people who are really good at the game think about their strategy.
Seems natural, right? Yeah. And if you're strictly like I'm non-human adjacent, I don't want to know a thought process. Get the raw stats with the Opta filtering stat situation that Hub is really great at, and they're really good at clean visualization. So big fans. Visit fantasyfootballhub.co.uk/always for 50% off at any tier. Josh, I believe this is the point at which we take a quick break.
Nice, clean break, Brandon. We're going to get back and we're going to jump right into it. We've got an honorable mention, a pre-honorable mention, and then our top 10. So lots of midfielders to discuss. Let's take a break. All right, Brandon, we're back. Top 10 midfielders for the new Fantasy Premier League season. So we went through this. We got our top 10. We actually have a tie in the 10th place spot. And we realized we had a couple players. When we did our forward pod, we ran through the top 10, and then I had a few players that we just discussed a little bit at the end. But I just thought maybe as like a listening experience, it'd be kind of interesting to know who just missed the cut, right? Who was sort of there were it's a little bit like in golf, Brendan. You've got the fairway, then you got the first cut of rough, and then the second cut of rough, right? Sure. And then I guess there's like out of bounds or whatever.
I thought you were going to talk about the literal cut, like in the Open, like guys who didn't make the last day or something like that. That would have been more apt. I'm just suggesting, but I'm with you. Different cuts of grass.
That's true. Different kind of. Yeah, that's true. But these are the rough cut to start here is our pre-honorable mention. So apologies to Morgan Gibbs-White, Brice Eze, James Madison, and Andreas Pereira.
So sorry.
You are in our thoughts. You just will not be discussed on this particular podcast. So that is the pre-honorable mention. Just missed the cut. More to come on those players, I'm certain, as the season goes on, especially because they're more affordable.
Morgan Gibbs-White did not enter either of our tables, and I told you before we started. This is the guy this is going to be our Nicholas Jackson. The people are going to most comment about his absence because he's. When he moved to Forest, he ended the season on 12 assists. He basically has turned into the new James Ward-Prowse, assuming JWP doesn't make his way back to the Premier League. So, but at $6 million, that's a tough one to sell. I don't want to hit these rough cut guys too hard, but I do just want to quickly say on Andreas Pereira, I think Mitrovic probably almost definitely leaving Fulham this summer is a huge win for Pereira because he's next in line for penalties, as we all assume. So at 5.5, if Fulham can hit any sort of stride during this season, Andreas Pereira will become a good pick.
I still think Vinicius could be an interesting pick too. Mm-hmm. I just don't know if Raul Jimenez is really going to be starting all the time, but him joining does make things more complicated for Vinicius.
Totally.
If he had that lane to himself, it's kind of like a Vissa, where Vissa, it seems like he's going to have the lane to himself, which makes things a little easier. So, and I think that Morgan Gibbs-White. I just think in general, we talked about value at the top of this pod, and $6 million for a Forest midfielder, despite his performance last year. It has nothing to do with his quality, but it's just teams at the bottom half of the table don't tend to score as often, right? That's just a fact. And I think it makes things a little tricky when you can go up just $500,000, $1 million more and get some of these starting midfielders on top 6, top 7 teams. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really what dinged him a little bit in the rankings.
Yeah, imagine.
Again, we don't pick this stuff, Brandon. This is all
we just read the paper that's spit out from the dot matrix printer
in front of us.
But imagine paying 0.5 more than Morgan Gibbs-White and getting Matoma. So that's just kind of what you're talking about.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and we'll see if Matoma cracks the list, Brandon. Who knows?
Spoiler.
We'll see. So those are the pre-honorable mentions. We have some actual honorable mentions here. 4 players actually that we want to talk about before we get to our top 10. Raheem Sterling, 7 million price, 3.3% ownership. The way people have been talking about Sterling, I just assumed he would have cracked like 5% ownership or something. 3.3 is shockingly low. And 6 goals and 4 assists last season, which was obviously a huge dip from what he'd done. I mean, basically every Chelsea player that's moved anywhere this summer, you're like, wow, that was really a dip from the previous year. Yep. I mean, he had 5 consecutive seasons of double-digit goal returns before that. Now, granted, that was at Man City. It's a different situation. But, I mean, the question is he washed up? Were Chelsea just sort of out of sorts? We all kind of know that Chelsea was were just like a kind of a mess last season. Is it a little bit of both? I mean, what do you think about Sterling?
I think it's a combination of both. I think Chelsea was very broken last year, and Sterling was also very broken. The good signs, just in the little we've seen of Pochettino in the summer, is Chelsea are scoring goals. The lineups look kind of interesting. There is some semblance of a plan. Now, Mudryk started tonight against Newcastle on the left, where Sterling would probably play. It's unclear at this point what Pochettino has planned. We'll know more in the next 2 weeks, certainly as we're prepping for our Game Week 1 deadline. But no, Sterling is not anywhere close to my thoughts right now because you do what he did last summer, you're gonna have to apologize or do something. I mean, yes.
What do you mean last summer? Like it makes it sound like he did like a specific thing, like he ran somebody over with his car. Like,
I know what you did last summer, Raheem. I mean, he's has a great history, and that's one of the categories that we're not taking just last season into account, but certainly playing for Liverpool and City when there were in good moments when Sterling was there, did that overinflate Sterling's capability? Is he just not a player who's going to do it all? Is he not like a lone star?
He was very good at Liverpool too. Before he moved. Mm-hmm. Doesn't Liverpool time for him feel so incredibly far away now?
Sure does. Like, he was a wee babe.
He was. I remember when he was just a 4.5 million player. Yeah. Speaking of 4.5 million guys. So, he has to get mentioned because I guess he's in my thoughts more than you, just because if there's one thing that traditionally has been fantasy gold, it's when a very good team, frequently Chelsea, puts up like a real stinker of a season and doesn't qualify for Europe. And suddenly they have an entire year of smooth sailing, just Premier League and domestic cups. And they tend to bounce right back up to, European spots, and their players, they're more consistent, right? There's less rotation. So whoever ends up emerging on that left flank, right? Yeah. Whether it's Mudryk, whether it's Sterling. They don't have Havertz anymore. They don't. Pulisic is I think officially gone now as well.
Oh, yeah, he's already playing for Milan.
Yeah.
He's got an
Is he already
assist
playing for Milan?
Days
Okay,
ago, yeah.
Oh, did he? Okay, good. Okay, I knew that was rumored, and then I just sort of.
You don't have to worry about him anymore, Josh. He's fine.
I didn't enjoy. I was so excited to have him join Chelsea, and then it became so stressful as an American that it ceased to be fun. I just want him to go somewhere else. And Milan have this great history of these players have these long careers there, and they extend people's careers. And Olivier Giroud has found apparently Giroud called him and pitched him on moving there. So. Anyway, so let's hope things work out for who am I talking about again? Let's hope things work out for
talking about Sterling.
We'll see about Sterling.
So I think last on that, I think the best case scenario for Chelsea is they find themselves in an Arsenal situation where between Jackson and Cuckoo and Sterling, you've got 3 mid-tier priced guys who are scoring goals, easy to slot into your team. Yeah. The question we have is who's it going to be? And the feeling is maybe the better bet and the easier fit into a fantasy lineup is going to be up front for Chelsea. That's my thinking.
Yeah, I think they're a team that has like $1 billion worth of players, and they're priced like a 11th place team, which they just really aren't in terms of talent. And so, yeah, I'm with you. If they figure it out, there's going to be a ton of value there. I guess value is the theme of this week's pod. So let's move on to the next player, Jarrod Bowen. Brandon, perhaps you've heard of Jarrod Bowen.
JJ.
Yeah, he may pronounce it. He may pronounce it Jared. No, I know Jared Bowen. $7 million. Another low ownership player, 5.8%. He had 6 goals and 9 assists last season. It was actually a little better than I thought he did, because it was such a steep drop, almost half of his returns the previous season. He had 12 goals and 17 assists the year before that. So, major dip. He was much improved, I'll note, in the second half of the season. He had only 2 goals and 0 assists after the first 16 matches last season. So he picked up 4 goals and 9 assists in effectively the final half of the season. And so I think that is an important thing to note, that there was maybe a little bit of, they had a big season, maybe a little bit of a hangover effect. I don't really know. And
he ended on a high note, Josh.
Exactly.
Scoring the game winner for the Europa Conference League trophy. So that's a big deal. However, West Ham struggled last season, fighting on multiple fronts. What happens this season with Declan Rice, their best midfielder, if not their best player, is gone? Does that back West Ham even farther into the corner? This is my concern. But let that not besmirch Jarrod Bowen, because I'm a believer. I think he is. There are players where you think, whether it's Aaron Ramsey or Miguel Almiron, where you're like, well, this is just kind of magic, and we're not going to replicate this. Bowen does project real deal sort of status.
I wish he was a little bit cheaper. I wish he was 6.5, right? It's hard to look at Matoma and Bowen. I mean, maybe we don't need to keep holding Matoma up here, but for 0.5 million cheaper, you can get Matoma, a player who performed better last season on a better club. And it's sort of hard to pass that up. I mean, I don't think the threat of the Europa League is so significant that it would make me go for Bowen over Matoma. All right, a couple more players. I think we're getting in the slightly more controversial territory, but again, we're still in honorable mention category here, Brandon. We've got Jack Grealish, 7.5 million, 7.8% ownership. And just listen to the ownership here, because I think it's interesting to know where these people kind of fall right now in terms of who's selecting them in the game. Because some are very high, like the Mboma, who we're going to talk about in a second, is at 23.5% ownership. Right, it's a very, very significant ownership. For preseason. So Grealish at 7.5 million, had 5 goals and 10 assists, and a real breakthrough. Second year at Man City, really claimed the left wing spot for his own, but became a very regular starter. However, he was the player we talked earlier about, a player that I had a little higher in the top 10. And then when you and I talked it through, I think you were sort of making the case that he just hasn't, certainly since he's been at Man City, been a very satisfying player to own in fantasy, right? It's like the kind of the aggregate numbers look good at the end of the season, but week to week, he's not a very. Am I saying this correctly?
In a way, even just before he got to City at Villa, he's never been, just to compare him to the best of the best, he's never come close to a 200-point fantasy season. When he was at Villa 2019-20, 149 with 8 goals and 70 assists was his highest points tally. And if we're weighting historical efficiency in fantasy, Grealish doesn't have it. For me, he falls into that Jordan Henderson, James Milner sort of bracket of, I want a piece of this really good team, and here's a guy who plays and is cheaper than the rest. I can fit him in. But to that point,
that seems too Milner and
I just think he's got. I think he has a low floor and a low ceiling. Listen, and I'm not saying I don't rate Grealish as a player. He's obviously one of the best players in England. But from a shrewd fantasy perspective, I think it's low floor, low ceiling. Not worth it.
Yeah, he's not a great. I feel like he's not a. His goal scoring instincts have never really been spectacular, have they? And I feel like that's the one thing that's really held him back a little bit fantasy-wise. And at this point, we have a fairly long track record to look at in terms of his returns. I mean, the most goals he's ever scored in the Premier League was 8, and that was 4 years ago. And that was at a squad that needed somebody to score goals, right? Yeah. And unlike now, where it's, Haaland just takes all the goals. I mean, even someone like De Bruyne is. His goal scoring output suffers as a result of Haaland the goal, the Roomba of goals, right? Just goes around sucking.
I love the idea of Haaland just aimlessly like bumping into all the corner flags, mapping out the entire pitch, hoovering up all the goals. I love that.
Yeah, it feels that way. But the end
just
of the,
empty
yeah,
out
the
all
match.
the Nike balls at the end of the match into a bucket.
Yeah, exactly. Now I want that as like I want that on my T-shirt. I want the Haaland the Hoover or the
Haaland the Hoover right, actually works. Yeah,
Haaland it actually works better than Roomba, doesn't it? All right, so we've got Grealish, and I ultimately really was persuaded by your case, and I think that because when it comes down to it. I don't really have any strong desire to have Jack Grealish on my fantasy team, right? Yeah. And if someone's going to make your top 10, you might want to find them somewhat compelling in terms of adding them to your
controversial team. In that Grealish had one of the highest rankings in our algorithm of fun factor to own. Very fun to own. But it couldn't make up the difference in all the other categories.
It's true. Well, he's fun to own because his ownership doesn't tend to be that high.
He's a cool
and he
guy.
Plays all these minutes. Yeah, he's got that fun hair. He seems like he had more fun than anybody when they won the Premier League. Like credit to him. Yeah. So the final honorable mention here is in one of the tougher cuts, I'd say. But it's just how I know we're joking about our proprietary model, but he really was the final cut here for the top 10. And that's Brian Mbeumo, 6.5 million, 23.5% ownership. So quite high ownership. 9 goals and 9 assists last season. I have to admit the sheer the actual returns were higher than I was expecting. I somehow didn't realize he was that close to a double of fantasy returns,
which would be impressive. Yeah, and I watched the entirety of the Brentford Brighton match tonight, Wednesday, July 26th, and Mbeumo and Wissa both started. Mbeumo was stuck on the right. He was playing the Salah role, and he did look on it. He looked very fit. He looked very composed. He was playing very creative passes. He was looking for Wissa in the middle. He's interesting. I think Brighton, it's preseason, so we shouldn't look too much into it. But Brighton looked a little bit off the pace and just didn't look like they weren't oozing. They weren't sparkling for me. I'll say that.
Yeah, I think losing McAllister is going to take a little time to adjust to.
That's Brighton. I'm talking about Brentford, but
Brentford, yeah.
But Brighton, yes. Well, one cannot discount losing McAllister there. Brighton had some new guys who look great. That's a whole other thing that we could talk about later.
That's a horse of another color. Maybe one will crack our top 10. Let's see what happens.
Given I had not heard of the guy who scored a brace tonight until he scored a brace, he's not.
I know I feel like there are some people that you see on well, anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, all right. So Mbeumo, you would expect more without Tony for half the season. I have to ask though, Brandon, long term, does being without Ivan Toney really help Mbeumo? I mean, he's 6.5 million. So it's a pretty high price, and they're losing maybe their best passer, or certainly one of their best passers, a focal point for the defense. And so there's going to be a lot more attention on him. And you would think that there would be strategies built around marking him out, right? And so even though he may kind of initially, just as often happens, you see this in many other sports, right, where the main player gets injured and somebody else does step up. But after a while, the team just isn't kind of as good because the main player is everything has to kind of slot into place. The main player is in the one slot, and everybody else is sort of a number 2, number 3 player. And I'm not sure that Mbeumo is a kind of lone star type player.
I tend to agree, and I think this is my overall concern about Brentford is Tony being out until mid-January, and then Raya, the goalkeeper, not even being in the squad tonight. No real rumors about where is Raya going to go. If I had to guess, I'd say Chelsea. But If Raya leaves and they don't have Tony, it's just like this is a picture of a team that is getting worse, not better. Now, not to discredit like Thomas Franks and he can work magic. I'm sure they'll be like a stable team, but as far as fantasy output, I'm with you. I feel like it's going to be on the downward trajectory.
Yeah. And so I think that's what's dinging him for me a little bit, as it's just and again he's the same price as Matoma, player I just. By the way, we're talking about Matoma. You'd think he'd be number 1 in our rankings, Brandon. This guy's the most bandied about name on this week's
Want me to rerun the program just to see if he comes out on top before we get into it?
We ran 100,000 simulations, and this is what we came up with. So. Yeah, why don't we run 100,000 more? And let's take it. We'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll see what it spits out. So Mbomo's certainly worth considering for your squad, but I don't think he's great value at 6.5, and I have some concerns about the team as you do. So let's move on to the top 10 now, Brandon. Top 10, we've got a tie to kick things off, just like we did with the forwards. Another way for us to cheat and add one more player for our discussion. Mason Mount and Phil Fodenio. So Mount is at $7 million, just joined Man United from Chelsea. One of those classic Man United moves where they were just bidding against themselves higher and higher as the summer went on. But they got their man, and I think it's a very good move for him, and I'm excited to see how it all works out. And then Phil Foden, who is an interesting spot as well, because he two of the best players for Man City just left, and in theory you would expect a spot to maybe be a little more stable for him this season. And I mean, the question is always, what is Phil Foden's best position? He plays everywhere, right? He can play as a. I mean, he was supposed to be the next David Silva at one point, and then that didn't really ever happen. And so then you see him, he was on the left, and then Grealish kind of took that spot, and so then he was on the right. And
Foden's played in so many positions.
KDB role.
I feel like if he were to leave the Premier League, every Fortune 500 company would be lining up to hire this guy. He's true. Basically been like through officer candidate school at the Marine Corps or something like that.
That's true. Yeah, he's like a Rhodes. Yeah, exactly. He's very accomplished. He could definitely play defense too. You could totally see him just become like a fullback or something, right? In 7 years. So I like both these players. I think Mason Mount got dealt a kind of tough hand last year with all the chaos at Chelsea. I mean, in general, I'm just not holding almost any of these players responsible for it, right? It just feels like they just bought and bought and bought, changed owners, changed managers. They had 3 managers ultimately on the season,
and which was precipitated by a change of ownership. So that wasn't just a slip of the tongue.
Exactly. So a lot of different things happened in the offseason, I think, that really affected the squad. So not a great season for Mount last year, but speaking of the double-double, Brandon, he had 11 goals and 11 assists in the season before that. And he's got a fairly, for someone who may ultimately slot in as more of a number 8 for Man United, I think that he has a pretty high ceiling. And he is the kind of player that can really explode and pick up. Mason Mount's the kind of player at $7 million who could score 20 plus points in a match. Maybe do it one or two times this season. And you don't often get that from a 7 million player, right? Usually those players are priced a little bit higher, but because he can score from midfield, because should be on more set pieces. I think he's the early talk is that he's maybe going to take on more of like the Eriksen role, right? So sort of like in front of Casemiro. What do you think about Mason Mount, just to start things off with him?
Sure. His greatest skills are pressing off the ball and progressing the ball, usually through passing. My concern about Mason Mount is I think his role is going to change match to match depending on the opposition, which would mean I feel like he'll probably get a ton of minutes, but if it's a tougher opposition where it may require more pressing and that Man United have less of the ball, is it going to lower the fantasy ceiling for Mason Mount? On the whole, though, I feel pretty optimistic about it. He is like one of the chief players, though, where I'm like, I just need to see what it looks like in reality before I come close to putting him into any sort of team.
Yeah, because you just feel kind of foolish going into game week 1 if he's there. I mean, this happened a little bit with Bruno at times last season, especially I think when Casemiro was out, where it's like you never want a player in your fantasy team to be literally off the screen, right?
Yeah,
it's
right.
like the screen is showing all the important stuff in the match. The team that your player is on is attacking, and you can't even see your guy because they're set so deep that they're falling off the screen. So there is a little off the screen concern with Mount, but Ten Hag is also and we haven't really seen this so far, so we'll see how it all plays out. But it could change. They could go back and forth a little bit. But Ten Hag has talked about how much he likes Bruno in a deeper role, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's impossible that we see Mount ultimately move ahead of Bruno in the in terms of his positioning. Mm-hmm. And if so, then you're looking at a player who is really exciting for fantasy at $7 million.
Yeah.
And so. Just a wait and see. I think he could end up being one of the most bought players over the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season. It would not surprise me at all if Mason Mount became a must-own level player over the first few weeks of the season.
Yeah, if he pulls a John McGinn and scores in game week 1, yes. he will be be the bandwagon of all bandwagons going into game week 2.
Or if we just see him in like a number 10 type role, right?
Yeah,
exactly. I don't think it's not like Ten Hag is going to come out there and just straight up say, how it's all going to play out. So, who even knows? God, that Man United lineup last night for the Wrexham match, I hope fans, they should be able to ask for a refund. I feel like if you go to see Man United and literally the only player that you might have heard of on the pitch was Johnny Evans, who's,
I think it was 42. like a totally different squad. They're actually playing Real Madrid as we talk. So it's like weird. Like Manchester United brought multiple squads into the summer.
So it's like Johnny Evans and the boys, and then you've got like the real. But it's like I don't think that those Man United Wrexham tickets were free. I highly doubt that was like a charity match. I'm pretty sure people had to go to Ticketmaster and buy them and have a very large upcharge attached to it. And then Paul Mullen got injured too, and he's out for the start of the season.
That's awful. So, I will say, just as we're talking about, so the way Manchester United's first team essentially lined up against Real Madrid tonight is Mainu, a midfielder I'm not familiar with, who's in the pivot with Casemiro, and Mount is playing on the right, kind of in the Anthony role. Mainu gets injured, taken off in the 6th minute, replaced by Christian Eriksen. So we've got Klaxon, Mount, and Eriksen on the pitch at the same time. Who will take the free kick?
This is exciting. I love how much tape you're watching this summer, Brad.
You're
much more plugged in.
It's going right into my veins at the moment. I'm not sure if how much is actually sticking, but we're trying.
Yeah, you should be going on our Twitter and dropping some match reports. This is good stuff.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Or do it on Threads. I don't know.
I need to get rid of this knowledge. Unburden myself.
Or X. Yeah, why are you not on X all the time, Brad? What's going on?
I don't know, because everyone thinks it's a pornography site or something like that. What is the weirdest?
Or it sounds like a drug. Yeah. Oh yeah, Brandon's on X now, so just you can ignore him.
All right, can we get into the? We're into the top 10. So we do need to touch upon Phil Foden anymore. I guess the thing I would say about Foden over Mount is that Foden he's just by far the more attacking player on the more attacking. I guess he's on Man City, I guess, to put it bluntly.
Yeah, totally.
And he's just so he's a little ballerina in that 18-yard box, and I love him. And the question that we talked a little bit about last week was, is Phil Foden standing to inherit the Kevin De Bruyne central role like he did in the Champions League final, or is he still going to be wrestling with Grealish for minutes on the left?
Yeah, and De Bruyne still.
He's
still, supposedly.
He's traveled with the team so far as we know.
Yeah. I know, but then, at the end of the season when Pep was like, oh, yeah, his hamstring is gone.
It's ripped in half.
Ripped in half. That doesn't sound good. It sounds like that might take more than 3 weeks to
sounds like
heal
it
up.
Staples of some kind.
Yeah, it doesn't sound good. It sounds like a thing that could re-injure itself. I mean, hamstrings are like notorious for just dogging players for years and years. So, yeah. So let's see where Scott's at. I think that he's a true community shield player. Really want to watch this year's community shield. I want to see how he plays, and I think that will tell us a lot about whether we should consider him. I mean, it's hard for me to fit him into my squad at the moment, right? I mean, there are so many midfielders that I'm excited about, and I think that's really why he's 10th. It's very unlike the forward pot where we had to get almost in the top 5 or 6 before there were players that I was really excited about. Yeah. I think in the midfield category, we've already discussed about 9 players, right? And we're still
kind of all want to have all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it really does get tricky, and I think Foden could be tremendous value. I just want to see where he's playing. If he's in that Gundo role, that's a slightly deeper role. He won't necessarily. It might help his. I mean, it'd be just great to have him on the pitch more consistently because it's not like Man City is rigid in terms of their formations, and he would certainly get chances. But I guess ideally you would have him maybe on the right. I mean, I just don't know if it's going to be Alvarez or Foden. It feels like one of those two players will be consistently starting on the right, and I'm just not sure which one it'll be yet.
Remains to be seen. All right, so that's the tie at number 10. Moving on to number 9, who do we got?
Yeah, the man himself, Karu Matoma, 6.5 million price, 37.6% ownership. Was he like a template? Like, was he like when you just like auto-tuned your team? Was he like
he might have been he might have been if memory serves. I mean, the price is so sweet for him.
It is.
Yeah, he's imminently
it feels
affordable.
like people are gonna It feels like people are going to overthink this one. Him and Estepanian, honestly, are just two players that I really, really, really strongly feel like I'm going to have in my squad going into game week 1. He was last season's second half breakout. He had 7 goals and 9 assists and just 24 starts. So again, you look at the total number there, you can see maybe why he's priced at $6.5 million. But 7 goals and 9 assists in 24 starts is really quite strong, especially for a $6.5 million player. You'd expect to start virtually certainly 30 plus matches this season. He did underperform his XG even by a goal and a half. So he was at like 8.47 or something like that. He did overperform his XA, Brandon, his expected assists. But I don't really like the fantasy game now has on the fantasy website or the Premier League website, you can see XG and XA. They just incorporated it, which I think is a nice change. But I think XA can be a little deceptive because you don't get an expected assist for like a shot that rebounds, and I don't think like Opta counts that as an assist, but the fantasy game does, right? So that's a tricky one.
And there are lots of different XG and XA models out there. A lot of people would swear by like ones on FBref or so on. So it's not clear to me where the Premier League is getting their XG from. Is this something that Opta has calculated? But I think for the purposes of our discussion, for what Deep Blue has fed us on our trusty dot matrix printer, that's what we're going with. I think it's just sort of a template setting sort of stat. I agree. The thing I love about Matoma is he's fun factor plus results. He is all action. Pretty much everything he does results in a take on, which is good for bonus. It results in a chance created or a chance that he's taking. And it's just so much fun to watch, and you're just like waiting for the points to happen. There were many matches last season where you had to wait 90 minutes for it to occur, and magically it did because he is always involved in the Brighton attack. And yes, Josh, to tap into my intake of summer series, every time Matoma has stepped on the field for Brighton, it's been exactly the same. He's just running at defenders and doing that thing. He's already got an assist to his name this summer.
Yeah, I think that it's and just speaking of Brighton in general, obviously they did lose McAllister, but. And there's a couple other players who are rumored, but I think the team fundamentally will look fairly similar year over year, and I think they actually could have. I think the forward spot might be a little more stable this year as well, and I think that could really help him pick up some easy assist too, because again, he's like, as you say, he's so dangerous going down the left, and he's creating a lot of chances, and maybe I don't know. So I think it's just fun to have a player in this Brighton attack. I mean, De Zerbi just made Brighton so exciting last season. They were just a really fun squad to watch, and I don't know why that would change just because of the loss of McAllister. I mean, they were rotating pretty heavily at the end of last season because of all the double game weeks that they had, and they were still performing really strongly all the way down the stretch. And so I think that Brighton and you know they have the Europa League, but first of all, that's not going to be a factor early on in the season. And I think in general, it behooves Premier League managers. And if they want to avoid getting sacked, it behooves them to put their eggs in the Premier League basket, right, and not worry so much about Europe. And so, any concern about Europe with Matoma would be more of a like February, March, April problem.
Totally interesting thing that I observed in the Brighton Brentford match was this mid Simone Andingra, who was playing in the Solly March role on the right, and he was on loan last season for Brighton. He scored a brace. One of his goals was from an assist from your boy Jason Steele in goal.
Ooh,
so there's a sub honorable mention for Simone Andriga. Keep your eyes out.
I like that. I think that there's. Well, you and I are going to see Brighton on.
We'll more scouting after this weekend.
We're going to see Brighton and Newcastle play on Friday, and we'll see if Solly March has something to say about our rankings as well. Right? He didn't even make the second cut. Oh, is he injured? Oh, phew. Okay, good. All right, then we don't have to get in trouble for him not even making the second cut of rough. All right, well,
he's out of bounds.
That's where we are. That's Matoma.
What's up? It's Kaylee Cuoco. When it comes to travel, we all have a happy place. I just went to my happy place. I just went to Maui, and it was truly amazing. Priceline has always been about getting you to your happy place for a happy price with deals you really can't find anywhere else. Like up to 60% off select hotels in Costa Rica or 5-star hotels for 2-star prices in Cabo.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Number 8 is, we mentioned him briefly a moment ago, is Kevin De Bruyne. 10.5 million, 6.5% ownership. My first note here, Brandon, was that 8th for Kevin De Bruyne feels too high and too low somehow. There's no good spot to slot him in right now, I feel like. At 10.5, it's just tricky. He's sort of like, you know, it's just not... He's still a little... He's pretty expensive considering what you can get for 2 million or even 2.5 million, you know, in some of the Arsenal, Man United, even some of the Liverpool midfielders. And so it's really hard to put him much higher from a value perspective. Obviously, he's a great player. Obviously, we'll expect double-digit assists from him this season. But he's been injured a lot over the last couple of years. His hamstring is, as you noted before, stapled together. That doesn't seem good. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on Kevin De Bruyne?
So we're in this position where now everyone wants to be the first to predict the demise of Kevin De Bruyne. Now, he's won his Champions League. He's won all the European trophies. Mm-hmm. Is he now going to become that, like the old version of Steven Gerrard in his latter Liverpool days, where he comes on for 3 minutes and gets a red card because he just doesn't like anybody anymore? But is it too soon? Because I like Kevin De Bruyne, still my favorite midfielder on planet Earth. I love watching him play.
How old is he?
Is he like 32, maybe
29? No, he's younger than that. I think he's he is 32. Okay, that's
nailed it.
I'm impressed. That was and he just turned 32.
He's my guy. I have to know how old he is, I guess. You know, because fair. My favorite players always look to see how close our birthdays are, so see if we can ever have a joint birthday party together. So that's why I know how old he is. De Bruyne is in this awkward position of, well, if he starts and he's good, I definitely want to consider having him. But there's a good chance that it's going to be much more tenuous than that, or hard to read. So that's kind of when you look at the balance of the factors that we put into Kevin De Bruyne's sort of rating, it's like high ceiling, because if he plays, highest ceiling there is with his potential for bonus goals and assists. But the risk factor seems like it's starting to build year on year for him.
I think so too, and especially when there's so many other players who can, I won't say do what he can do, but who have the potential to. I mean, Alvarez. I think it's interesting that Pep frequently played Alvarez, who is ostensibly a forward, in the Kevin De Bruyne spot last year, and he may be getting groomed to do something similar. You know, I mean, no one can do the Kevin De Bruyne thing of match kicks off, win the ball, burst down the right, throw send an absolute perfect cross that like the player doesn't have to move to score. I mean, that is, he's an absolute genius.
Yeah, so you'd have to basically get Trent Alexander-Arnold and train him to be a midfield destroyer in order to it's unduplicatable. It's incredible.
Yeah. But the other problem, it was similar to Foden, is Erlin, the Roomba, why can't I say his name? Erling Haaland is a hard name to say. Erling Roomba Haaland is swelling up his goals, right? He had 7 goals last season. It was down from 15 previously. So it's a gigantic year-over-year drop in goals for someone as good as Kevin De Bruyne. And honestly, you'd expect that to continue. I mean, it is an approach that netted them a Premier League and Champions League title. I don't know why you would radically change. I mean, Pep won't be able to resist, but I don't think that he's going to radically change that philosophy as long as Haaland is healthy. All right, so let's move on from. We've talked a lot about Man City already. I think it's time for us to start talking about Arsenal, Brandon. The first Arsenal midfielder jumps into our rankings at number 7. It's Gabriel Martinelli. Interestingly, of all the 3 Arsenal midfielders that crack our top 10, the one that's lowest is the one that I had for the most weeks last season. I had Martinelli more than anybody else,
and rarely suffered for having him. So it feels unfair to say demerits to Martinelli for anything because
still top 7.
He had an exceptional season. I think what really underscored how wonderful these Arsenal midfielders were was their price last season as well. So now that Gabriel Martinelli and his counterparts have been bumped up into the 8 million plus category, we've got to put them under a bigger microscope. A bigger microscope? I don't know. But here's
more powerful microscope.
Yeah. So going back to the XG, I wanted to point out this fact that goals scored 15, and the Premier League site says just a little over 9 XG. So a question on Gabriel Martinelli is how much is he overperforming and how sustainable is what he is doing? And I mean, eye test, I don't remember.
He's an enjoyable player to watch, right?
And I don't know what part of his goals were harder to create. Was the runs that the lung busting runs that he made, or the finishes that he applied to them? I don't know, but this is the concern. Martinelli is just like a straight up numbers concern, and another one of my issues is Arteta's doing a phenomenal job this summer creating squad depth, bringing in Rice and Havertz. You've got Trossard that can play in a number of positions. What's Martinelli? How Martinelli are his minutes going to be further reduced? Saka feels like he is the Harry Kane of Arsenal, and that he's going to be playing 90 whenever he can and very involved. And then there's Odegaard, who is so integral to whatever they're doing. So I think these are all the reasons why Martinelli is still in a phenomenal place in the top 10, but probably has the most number of flags, minor as they may be, amongst the Arsenal players.
Yeah, I think Trossard in particular, who's played, he's not as good as Martinelli, but he's a very capable fill-in, and you can see it's just that little those handful of matches, right? Like let's say there's a crucial Champions League tie coming up in October, right? And they just really want to play. Arteta really wants to play Martinelli for that match, that's the match where Trossard's going to play. And you can't, I mean, I don't want to repeat what you just said, but you can't really see Saka or Odegaard not playing both those matches. Right. Whereas Martinelli, it's just a lot easier not a lot easier, but there's a more capable kind of like for like replacement than there is with the other two.
But just to be positive about him, though, he is the cheapest of these three mids on Arsenal. So if you're 0.5 shy of Saka, I would not lose any sleep having Martinelli instead.
No,
I lose a little sleep.
I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my Arsenal midfield and how I'm going to have at least one, maybe. It's hard to figure out how it's all going to work. I mean, I almost wonder if I end up defaulting to Gabriel Jesus as my kind of second Arsenal attacker because I don't know how to fit everybody in. It's just so tricky to do it. So
here's the thing you want to consider, though. The opening fixtures for Arsenal are home Nottingham Forest, away Crystal Palace, home Fulham. Then it's Manchester United, followed by Everton, Spurs. Boy, it's a very good opening slate of three fixtures. So it's pretty cool.
Well, Gabriel Jesus is their forward. He, in theory, should be able to score some goals. Yeah. Just because he's not good at it doesn't mean it couldn't happen.
All true.
All right, let's do one more player, and then we'll take a break. And this player, I think, was a surprise for both of us that he popped up quite so high. And that is, even though of course he's a wonderful player, is Son, who is 9 million, only 5.4% owned. Delightful player to watch. I have not exactly delighted in having him in my fantasy team. He's one of my bad luck players. Never seem to have him at the right moment. But this could be a huge fantasy year for him. I think whether or not Kane leaves. If Kane leaves, then obviously it could be massive for him and for Richarlison, who you and I decided not to discuss on this week's pod. We'll see what happens with Kane. Richarlison scored a brace today. I mean, he's certainly, if was it a hat trick? Yeah. I mean, if Kane leaves, then you're going to have a 7 million midfielder probably playing as a forward for Spurs. So that we're going to have to reckon with that. And listen, Richarlison has been amazing for me during his during those Everton days. I had some great moments with Richarlison. I think we can have those back, Brandon. Those days can come back. But we're here to talk about Son. It could be a huge fantasy year for him if Kane leaves. But I think even just the addition of Maddison should help Son, I think, a little bit. Son had to do a lot of work on his own last year. They never quite figured out the midfield, or at least the kind of attacking part of the midfield. And I think Son was just a little off last year too. I felt like, I don't know if it's a cumulative minutes thing or what, but it didn't feel like, certainly the first half of the season, that the kind of fire was there.
He was a lot off, I would say. And I think this is the PTSD with fantasy managers. It was his being out of form last season combined with the huge price jump that he had to endure. Was he like 10.5? Right. Which it was fine that he was unownable because we didn't really need to have him because he wasn't scoring goals. The way I'm kind of thinking of Spurs right now is like Chelsea light, like everything we're saying about Chelsea in terms of new manager, new lease on life. Assuming Kane goes this summer, it will be a very similar thing, but almost. And listen, all the Spurs fans enjoy getting at me after these podcasts, but sure, I do feel like it's slightly more unpredictable. Postecoglou seems like a great manager, did very well at Celtic, but he has to come to a new division. And there are some certainties with Chelsea in terms of Pochettino understanding the league and all of that. So anyway, I'm just being a little bit more cautious in my optimism with Son and Spurs.
Yeah, I think that I think the Chelsea-like comparison makes a lot of sense. I was just looking at Son's numbers while you were talking for the second half last season. He was much more consistent, that's for sure. He really, I think he had, 5 goals in his last 10 or 11 matches, 3 assists. So whatever was kind of dogging him at the start of the season. It was kind of funny because you're looking. I remember he had this hat trick that he scored in the first half of the season. It was a hat trick off the bench. That was the sign that things probably weren't. It wasn't probably not going to be Leicester's season when they allowed a hat trick off the bench from Son.
Oh yeah, who was that idiot who was in goal for so long?
Danny Ward, right?
Danny Ward, yeah, that was just like humiliation upon humiliation.
Yeah. So better priced. He's just removed Son from a 23 goals and 10 assists season, massive season. Was he the overall number one point scorer 2 seasons ago? I think if he wasn't, he was in the top 3. This is before Holland joined the league. I think he was up there with Salah, I believe. But anyway, regardless,
Golden Boot winners.
Mm-hmm. So I think that, new manager, some regression to his play of previous seasons. I think that we could see Son really deliver. I hate to say wait and see because it's just a kind of a boring answer, but given all of the players, like the next 4 players that we're going to talk about, 5 through 2, are all priced at the same price or lower than Son. And so I think that's why he's kind of in that wait and see category, because it just seems like you can find better players for that price or cheaper going into the season. But the ceiling, again, we talked about these inputs that we had, and just when you look at historical track record, when you look at just a number of different factors, he doesn't get injured very often. There's just a lot of things in his favor. I think that he could be great fantasy asset. So Brandon, let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll reveal our top 5 in our midfielder rankings. All right, Brandon, we're back. 5 players to go. These 5 players come from 3 clubs. Let's kick things off with number 5, Martin Odegaard, 8.5 million, 20% ownership. Finished with the second most points of any midfielder in the game. So, Brandon, why is he 5 in our midfielder rankings, not 2?
Well, I suppose it has to do with the floor and ceiling inputs. Like, while Odegaard is instrumental to so much of what Arsenal does, he can frequently be the assist to the assist. He's the one unlocking the defenses for the farther forward folks to finish. The thing that Odegaard so impressed everybody with last season is he said to all the haters, "You want me to score more goals? Here's 15 of them. And a lot of them will be just of exquisite quality." So, and I think the exciting thing about him and the fun factor is, I frankly I wouldn't be surprised to see him do even more. He feels like he's a player who could go yet farther and farther, and he's basically the Kevin De Bruyne in the making, but maybe a more athletic Kevin De Bruyne in many respects, one that could operate more in close quarters. So he's just really fun. He, unfortunately, from a fantasy point of view, just doesn't have as many arrows in his quiver as number 4. But I feel like this list reflects how accurately how I'm rating Odegaard in the mix. Is he just feels like if I'm going to have 2 Arsenal midfielders, Odegaard will be the second, regardless of who the first is.
Spoiler alert. But it may have Trossard was number 4. I think that it's obviously he's in the top 5, and maybe there's something about when you get up this high, you end up looking for negatives just because you're comparing them to all the players around them, and I think you've already kind of made the case. I think he gets a little dinged on historical performance than the 4 players above him. Had a great season last year, kind of reached his potential. I mean, in some ways, he's a little bit of a reclamation project after it didn't quite work out for him in Spain, and so it has a very good second half of the 21-22 season that sort of breaks out. But again, it's just he had a couple really big matches, and that really helped him to finish second overall. And so maybe there's just a little concern that maybe he won't reach the kind of I mean, I think he could continue to grow as a player, but whether he grows as a fantasy player, that's the one question.
Yeah, I mean, his XG, how he produced over his XG is no different than what we were just saying about Martinelli. I mean, he's a little closer on goals versus XG, but Arsenal was just overperforming on so many levels last season. So it's a fair question to ask: are any of these guys going to do as well as they did last season?
Yeah.
Is Arsenal going to do as well as they did?
They might be a year. They might have been a year ahead of schedule in some ways too. I mean, with the development, and sort of everybody got good at the same time, right? You had Martinelli kick it up a notch, Odegaard. It's basically it's the dream for every kind of top half of the table squad, right? Is that your young players turn into superstars. Your reclamation projects
work,
come good, and then you have a couple good free agent signings, and sort of everything clicked for them last season. But I think what makes me excited about them is that they kept going. Right, they were like, okay, let's get Declan Rice, which an incredible move. Right, I just don't think you can overpay for center backs or defensive midfielders. I just think that those positions it's so hard to find genuine top level quality that you just have to overpay, even if maybe he's not worth 105 million or whatever they paid for him. So I just it's exciting. I think it's exciting to see how it all shakes out with this squad, and maybe we'll talk more about that in our game week 1 preview pod. But I'm feeling pretty high about Arsenal and what they might be able to pull off. And Havertz, I mean, he's the one midfielder that we're not going to be talking about in this pod. Let's see what happens if an injury. He can play in a lot of different spots. So if Martinelli got injured, if Gabriel Jesus was injured, you could see some spots where he possibly even Saka. You could see some spots where he could slot in. So he could be a viable fantasy asset at some point, but certainly not going into the season.
Well, you're dancing around number 4 here, so let's just jump into it with Saka, who's priced same as Odegaard at 8.5 million. His ownership already in FPL is hilariously high at 53%. It's not really hilarious. It's just it makes me uncomfortable. I also have him in my squad. I am among the 53%.
Sure. Me too.
Because I mean, he is. I mean, you said earlier, Josh, like with great players, do you just end up looking or trying to find excuses to knock them? And I have a tendency to think, well, Saka can disappear in matches, and yet he always finishes matches and seasons being just like remarkably the best player for his club. So very high on this guy. He relished taking penalties last season and was really good at converting them, which is a big factor when you're looking at selecting between 3 great choices on one club. Well, why not just take the guy who's and that's why Saka among the XG overperformer squad is closest to being bang on, is because a lot of his conversions were from some of his conversions are from the penalty spot, which is good. It's good from a fantasy perspective. So I love him. I think 8.5 is still very reasonable value for him.
Totally. I think there was a moment in February or March of this season before he dipped a little bit where it would have been very reasonable for him to come in at like 10 million this season. And so, which may be a fair assessment of what we can expect from him, given how much Arteta loves him and sees him basically as his Kevin De Bruyne. His kind of maybe that's not quite an accurate comparison. I mean, well, De Bruyne in terms of his kind of talismanic role within the squad, maybe
Salah. He sees him as a Salah if you want to go position for position, right?
That's a better comparison. Yeah, right. Sure. Yeah, right winger. Speaking of, so Saka is the most owned player in the game at 53%. Haaland, of course, is the most owned forward. Do you know what Haaland's ownership percentage is, Brandon?
Yeah, I was just looking. I think it's like 89%.
Yeah, 86.3.
That's wild.
Who do you think is the most owned defender in the game?
I would say Trent Alexander-Arnold.
He is 4th. The most owned is Stupinan with 51% ownership.
Okay, lots of savvy managers out there.
I know. It's slightly annoying. And then, the players slots number 2 and 3 for the defenders give me some hope because you have Trippier at 35%, which I think is. I mean, we'll talk about defenders in a couple of days, but that seems at 6.5 million. I think he's a little too high this season. And then you have Luke Shaw at 5.5 and 33% owned. I'm not looking at Shaw.
I feel like that percentage is going down as we gradually get closer to the game week 1 deadline.
Yeah. All right, and just one more little fun thing then. Who do you think is the number 1 most owned goalkeeper in the game?
That's a good one. Is it? Wow, I want to say nobody. Like people have just chosen to not.
There's somebody at 30%.
30%. Is it
30.5%?
Is it Onana?
No, too soon for him. I think.
Yeah. He's too new of an addition. Is it
Alphonse Areola? He's
God. Okay, yeah. Everyone's backup keeper.
He's only 4 million, so he may be my starting keeper, Brandon. I mean, because Fabianski is he's replaced. He's officially supplanted Fabianski, right? So
according
I think
to
that
who?
That could be according to rumor. This is rumor. I believe this is true. Why are we doing this on the midfielder pod? I don't know. I couldn't help myself. I believe. Okay, well, let's make that a teaser for Sunday's
Okay,
pod.
yeah. Stay tuned for while we confirm rumors about Lucas Fabianski.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm right about that.
Okay,
though.
okay.
All right. So we both love Saka. I think that he's. There's almost not a lot to say about him because he's a terrific player who scores goals and picks up assists, and he's on one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the Premier League.
Yep.
He's 8.5 million. It's a very reasonable price. Probably underpriced. Number 3, and this is again another double here. And you and I went back and forth. I don't know if I ultimately convince you of my position here, but we've got Bruno 3rd and Rashford 2nd. You thought maybe Bruno should be 1st, correct?
I'm a Bruno guy and you're a Rashford guy. I'm willing to concede that it's probably a tie at this point. Now, we've kind of sort of baked a few caveats into the pod already with the Mason Mount conversation of, where is Bruno going to fit on the pitch? I just really... we spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about how psychotic Bruno Fernandes is. Mm-hmm. For many, he's constantly barking at the referee, his teammates, and I don't know, the ball children and himself, and no one is safe from him. He is so hungry for everything, and I think he is also ruthless in garbage time in these matches, and I don't know.
He's the captain now.
And exactly. I just see as Manchester United improve, I can't see how it doesn't improve Bruno's fantasy potential. So I'm voting for Bruno, but also Rashford. It's hard to make a case against Rashford by the same token. On the same token, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that my case for Rashford over Bruno is. It feels like a lot of the appeal for Bruno is that 0.5 million difference, but I owned Bruno for a lot of last season, and he can be a very, very frustrating player to own in fantasy. There are times, sometimes it was because of Casemiro suspensions, I realize, but there are times when Bruno can find himself very deep in matches. There are times when Bruno sulks and picks up unnecessary yellow cards, which can be very annoying. And there are ultimately times when Bruno is playing the pass that goes to the goal scorer, right? Sometimes what he's doing is he's the playmaker, and he's not necessarily picking up goals and assists. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that he didn't get double-digit goals or returns last season, right? 8 goals and 9 assists, and only 10 and 7 in the season before that, which isn't spectacular. It's good. But so I think the fact that even though he only had 8 and 9 last season, the fact that we have him 3rd is a statement. And so I feel like I'm just doing what we just talked about, which is I'm just negging the player that we have 3rd in overall rankings. But it's just specifically in comparison to Rashford, where I just feel like I don't know. To me, Rashford is only 0.5 million more, and he's going to be playing further forward, and I think he's going to be scoring more goals, even with Bruno on pens. He picked up 7 assists as well. I mean, Rashford can pass, and it was a huge bounce back from him. There's a reason he started the season at 6.5 million, which is absolutely insane. Last season he started so low. Available for 9 million now, which is probably still, honestly, I think a little bit low for maybe where he should be. 17 goals and 7 assists. It's his 4th season with double-digit goals, so it's not like this guy came out of the blue last year. I mean, it was just kind of, he had that one really rough season during Ten Hag's final year, but before that, he was a great fantasy asset for a long, long time. And so, I guess the question is, do we think that he's fully back, or was that kind of I don't know, like a dead cat bounce?
Was it an outlier? They say in
politics.
Yeah. I just, looking at Rashford's historical fantasy performance is interesting and compelling, but last season was his first time breaking that 200 points barrier, 205 points on a full season. Bruno has had a 244 point fantasy season. Now, granted, that was like 4 seasons ago, so you got to follow the trajectory of the line here. But I think the floor and the ceiling for Bruno feels higher. Whether that floor/ceiling is converted as regularly as Rashford is really the question that has to be answered. So
yeah, I think that's really interesting, and maybe it does point to our slightly, I don't want to say radically, because I actually don't think you and I think about fantasy that differently, but I do think that you maybe place a higher premium on a high floor, and I think I place a higher premium on a higher ceiling, and that's really maybe the dividing line between those two players.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
So they're both great. I think there's a good chance I have both in my team going into game week 1. Can I make it work? The only way to do it, as far as I can tell, is to not have Trent. If I go without Trent, I can put together a 3-5-2 that I don't hate. But that's kind of the only way I can really, I think, make it work. So someone's got to go. This is just how it is. You can't have every single player unless you just want to have this overloaded team of expensive players, and then everyone else is like 4 million. It just doesn't really work.
Well, speaking of someone who's got to go, I think that's really the big question about first place here is can we have this player or not?
This player, of course, is Mo Salah, the one-time greatest of all-time fantasy asset, now possibly moving into the number 2 spot in that ranking. I guess this is post-Ronaldo. You and I were not playing the fantasy when Ronaldo was still at Man United, and so I know that was kind of its own category.
We got glory days from Van Persie and Luis Suarez. Every era has their guy, maybe the lesser version of, but...
Luis Suarez, that's true. Yeah, you're right. Okay, okay. Yeah, Van Persie too. Van Persie was incredible, but I don't think either of them were at the level of Salah, or certainly not Haaland at his peak. So there's not much to say about Salah. There just isn't, because he's number 1. He's the best. His price is fair. His ownership is low. I mean, he's the best midfielder in the game, and his ownership is sub 25%. Brandon, just looking at that, I can't envision a scenario where I don't have Mo Salah, just based on that alone. I can't. If you can get the top midfielder in the game for under 25% ownership, I don't know how I can avoid it. I mean, because I don't even think that's necessarily terrible value, because he's so incredibly consistent. Even if you're not going to be captaining him most weeks because you're going to be captaining Haaland, the consistency and the ceiling, right? When we did our rankings here, we put a bunch of things together. He's at the top of so many of them, right? His ceiling is the highest of any midfielder. His floor, if it's not the highest, I actually think I think he did rate the highest, in fact, in terms of floor too. So highest ceiling, highest floor. That's a player that could be priced at 13 or higher, right? So at 12.5, it's really not insane, I don't think.
Yeah, this is why I was bristling at when the game was released. Everyone saying this is insane. I can afford to have everybody. Well, I haven't found a draft with Salah in it that I'm happy with. I find that I'm making fewer sacrifices with other parts of my team by not having Salah. However, it's like I'm making smaller sacrifices. Do they amount to a full Salah sacrifice, et cetera? This is the calculus.
Yeah,
I agree with you. It's like why would you not have Salah and sub 25%? Yeah, he's in differential territory, but this is
he really is. And when he scores 5 goals in game week 1, everyone's going to be kicking themselves that doesn't happen.
And he's done it.
I just stressed you out with that.
You are stressing me out. Well, you're stressing me out because I feel like the narrative the last 2 years, which had been up and down for Salah, even though he's still just like totally made a mockery of the fantasy game in the process, is every week where you think I'm using Salah as a differential. Everyone's captained somebody else. Yeah. Salah always ends up blowing it somehow. Yeah, missing a pen or something like this. So there is too much history with Salah at this point where, it's like a family member that I would pick them up anywhere. If they needed me, I'd be there. But I'm not spending that much on a Christmas gift for them. Is kind of how I feel about Salah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I've completely followed that metaphor, Brandon. But I mean,
I don't think it made sense. But
he did. He underperformed. Not to keep doing this, but he underperformed his expected goals by a couple last season. I think that might just come down to I'm not sure if this is the one thing. Yeah, we're gonna have to look into more of the XG stats as they appear on the because I'm not sure if the XG is non-penalty XG or standard XG.
Right.
That's an important factor because he did miss 2 pens last season. Finished on 19 goals with 13 assists. This team is better than they were last season though too, and I think that's a factor. I think it's going to open up some chances for him. I still don't see anyone really slotting into that right wing spot. I mean, this guy loves to play. He hates being benched, hates getting taken off at any point. Is constantly looking for opportunities to score more goals. And so I think he should be fine from that perspective. And so I would expect him to move up a little bit. I mean, he's getting a little bit older. He's not, he's 31 now. I mean, he's basically, he's a year younger than De Bruyne, but
how close is his birthday to mine?
Start to be? It's almost exactly. He and De Bruyne are like within like a week of each other.
So they can have a joint birthday party
months.
Then.
Yeah, they're about like 2.5 months. I don't know numerology, Brandon. We'll have to dig into that a little bit. And it's 85 days apart or whatever it is.
So 13. That's unlucky.
I don't really want to look at his age right now because I mean this guy is like the fittest player going and they've all had the summer off too. I think that's a huge factor. Mo Salah's played a lot of matches for Egypt over the last few years, right? Obviously they didn't qualify for the World Cup, but African Cup of Nations, he played all of those matches in the middle of that season. They all went. Every single one of them somehow went into 30 minutes of extra time. It's like they were all 0-0s. It was like very bizarre African Cup of Nations. So I think having the summer off for him could be huge. I don't really see. I don't feel like watching those matches. I had a feeling like, oh wow, Salah's really dipping in form. What I felt like was, oh wow, Darwin isn't finishing some of these chances that Salah's creating, or they hadn't quite clicked yet. And maybe Cody Gakpo being there will help a little bit.
And I think the point of this exercise is not necessarily he's number one. You have to have him in your team. Like the supercomputer has rightly said, Mo Salah is the best midfielder in the fantasy game. Now comes the human factor, and we have to either figure out how to fit number one player into our team or figure out how to work around that. I think the advantage of people who are thinking about going without Salah, which I very well may do, and I think that strategy is helped by Haaland's existence because Salah used to be so hard to not have because he'd be captained so widely every week. And now that most players will be captaining Haaland, it's easier to dodge Salah owners. So that's kind of a way to breathe a little sigh of relief. But what this ranking says is here are the players that are probably going to produce at this level Yeah, and per what I was saying earlier, like in which situation can you slot them in? Salah does feel like, if you can do him game week 1, that feels that the fun factor pretty high there.
Well, yeah, because it just does. I just don't. Wow, can I like speak a sentence here or what? It's just hard to see at the end of the season him not being the overall points leader in terms of what all midfielders do over the course of a season. So if we're looking at this through the long lens, I do think he's going to score the most points, and I don't think in value is a factor, but I don't think his value is terrible. It's appropriate, and he's not like incredible value, but he's not poor value either. I mean, obviously his price forces you to make some other changes, but in terms of the kind of consistency that you're going to get for that price, I don't think it's insane.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't buy the poor value argument, and you've just said as much. I'm in agreement.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, that's our pod. I feel like we covered a lot of ground. Substantive though, Brandon.
We covered as much ground as a Premier League midfielder on this podcast. Every blade of grass, and we still probably talked about 25% of all midfielders in the game. And I think what I'm excited about,
not even close.
Yeah, we've got so much more preseason content to mine until game week 1, and I think once we start building our teams, that's when all of the under the radar sub 6 million midfielders will start getting talked about more, and I'm excited to talk more about them on this pod.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, that's where we are. Thanks everyone for listening. Once again, if you've enjoyed the podcast, if you've enjoyed hearing us talk, if you want to support the podcast and get some mini leagues, get some bonus content, you and I have been talking about doing a deadline day show just for our patrons, and so we're trying to work that out as well. That'd be probably more like a video show, just so that people could actually process the stuff in real time as we sort of make our final decisions. You can go to patreon.com/alwayscheating. And I know we've got some glassware to send out, Brandon, and to our two of our newest patrons as well. But Brandon, do you want to thank our producer patrons?
Yeah, big thanks as always to Mike DePietro, Trevor Ingerson, our buddy Chris Howell, Babas Kuhn, James Holland, Dave Wegner-Lodahl, Nick Wright, Lazaros Janos, Jesse Holstead, Bruce Kerr, Brian Chin, Blair Jacobson, Todd Byerly, Andy Portlock at FPL Merch, Kerry Swanson, Jefferson Turner, Buffalo Wild Mings, Francis Moore, Sam Shower, Caleb Robbie, Vulgar, Paulson Kruger, Alex Holcomb, James Keatley, The Saint, Bob Fox, Craig Jackson, Shalin F. Kadakia, Terrence O'Donnell, Paul Herzig, Heath Cram, Thomas Tislob, Noah Louise, Travis Grant, Julia Pena, and our newest producer patron, Linus Wennerstrom. Rate, review, subscribe. Let's get us over 500 5-star reviews on Spotify. We're like around 450 right now.
So it's annoying. Okay, let's get across the line.
Yeah, come on, guys. It's free and easy. So help us out, or follow us on X at Hail Cheaters and wherever else you get branded social media. For all this information, including that league code to our very popular Always Cheating Super League, go to alwayscheating.com. That's a wrap.
Thanks, everyone. And we'll be back on Sunday with our defender and goalkeeper pod.